Before the world heard I Have a Dream, one young girl discovered a nightmare, and Miss Marple is about to reveal it. Welcome to the series of Driftaway Tales. If you are interested in these kind of fictional historical tales, then please like this video and subscribe this channel to show your support. Chapter 1: The Train to Montgomery. A mysterious invitation. People often believe that the greatest mysteries unfold in dark alleys or fog-covered estates. But Miss Marple had learned after a lifetime of quiet observation that the most dangerous secrets often travel silently, sealed inside letters that appear harmless. And this morning, as she held an envelope stamped Montgomery, Alabama, 1960, she felt that same familiar tingle. Something was wrong, yet calling out to her. The invitation claimed she had been requested to give a small lecture on patterns of human behavior in social change. A respectable topic, a respectable place. But tucked inside the envelope was a second slip of paper, burned on the edges, and on it only one chilling sentence: "They want to silence the truth before it reaches the children." Miss Marple's heart stirred not in fear, but in compassion. She had never turned away from injustice. And so, with her warm coat folded neatly and her cane beside her, she boarded the long-distance train to Montgomery. The journey had begun, and something deep inside her whispered that this trip was far more than a lecture. The rhythmic clatter of wheels usually soothed Miss Marple, but today it carried an uneasy weight, like a heartbeat hiding panic. She noticed at once that the passengers were divided. On the left side of the carriage sat white passengers. On the right, African-Americans, quiet, tense, some staring out of windows as if the landscape could swallow their worries. Segregation? Miss Marple had read about it, of course, but seeing it, feeling it, was different. Pain had a temperature, and here it felt warm and suffocating. A young black mother sat near her, rocking a child whose eyes were too tired for his age. Miss Marple gave her a small, gentle smile, the kind only kind souls recognize. The woman hesitated, then whispered, "Ma'am, are you headed to Montgomery?" "Yes, dear," Miss Marple replied softly, "for a small talk." The woman exhaled sharply, half relief, half fear. "Be careful there. People trying to change things. They're watched, even the good ones." Miss Marple saw fear trembling at the corners of the woman's lips, and behind that fear hope. "Thank you," she said kindly. "Your warning means more than you know." Before the woman could say more, a white ticket conductor approached. He did not look at Miss Marple, but his eyes hardened at the woman. "Keep your voice down," he muttered coldly. "This carriage doesn't need troublemakers." Miss Marple felt anger rise, not the loud kind, but the quiet, dignified kind that forms when a person witnesses injustice and cannot ignore it. The conductor walked away. The mother lowered her gaze. Miss Marple made her first deduction. The note in her envelope was no exaggeration. Someone truly feared the spread of truth, and truth, she sensed, was bleeding everywhere in this land. When she stepped off the train at Montgomery Station, the air felt heavier, humid, but charged, like the world held its breath. Signs reading whites only and colored waiting room stabbed her eyes with their cruelty. She had solved murders, exposed lies, and comforted the grieving. But this was a different kind of crime. A quiet civil war etched into everyday life. Miss Marple gripped her cane and walked slowly across the platform. Everywhere she looked, people moved with a strange mixture of fear and determination, like they had learned to walk with wounds that had not healed. At the end of the platform stood her supposed host, a tall, thin man with a crisp suit and a name tag reading Mr. Terence Hale. Miss Marple?" he asked, voice too polite to be sincere. "Yes, we're honored to have you. Everything has been arranged." But something about his smile felt stretched like rubber pulled too tight. And when he reached for her luggage, she noticed his hand trembled slightly. Fear or guilt? "Did you send the invitation yourself?" she asked casually. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but she caught it. "The university sent it," he replied too quickly. "I'm simply assisting." And Miss Marple made her second deduction. Either he was lying, or someone else was pulling strings behind him. On the way to her accommodations, Miss Marple asked Mr. Hale if she could stop by the old bus station where the famous incident involving Rosa Parks had taken place. He seemed reluctant, but she insisted with the gentleness of a woman who always gets what she wants. The bus stop was humble and ordinary structure with peeling paint, yet it held the echo of a revolution. Miss Marple stepped closer. The ground carried history's heartbeat. Then she noticed something odd. Near the corner of the bench, someone had scratched a symbol into the wood, 3 small arrows converging toward a circle. A code, a warning, a message. She traced the carved lines with her fingertips, and a wave of emotion washed over her. Not fear, responsibility. Behind her, Mr. Hale shifted nervously. "It's nothing," he stammered. "Kids carve these silly little things all the time." Miss Marple did not argue. She simply observed. His eyes avoided the carving. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. He knew the symbol. He feared the symbol. And she realized someone in Montgomery was sending secret messages, and someone else wanted to erase them. The anonymous letter burned in her pocket like a heartbeat. Her small guest room overlooked Montgomery's quiet streets. But quiet was a lie. She could feel tension humming under the surface, like an electric wire. As Miss Marple placed her coat on the bed, she noticed something unusual. Another piece of paper slipped beneath the door. She opened it slowly. This one was not burned, not damaged. Just a simple, handwritten warning. "If you speak the truth in your lecture, they will silence you too." Her pulse remained steady, not because she lacked fear, but because she had lived long enough to know that truth always demands courage. She sat beside the window, watching distant street lamps flicker. Who sent the message? Who wanted to stop the truth? And what exactly was the truth hiding beneath the civil rights struggle? Her investigation had begun, not into a murder, not into a theft, but into something deeper, a battle for dignity, justice, and humanity. Miss Marple closed her eyes just for a moment. Tomorrow, she would search for the sender of the cryptic notes. Tomorrow, she would trace the carved symbol at the bus stop. Tomorrow, she would step into the heart of a movement that refused to be silenced. Tonight, she whispered gently into the dark, "History is speaking. I must listen," before someone forces it into silence. Chapter 2. The Bus Stop of Courage. Echoes of Rosa Parks. Montgomery's morning light carried a strange gentleness, as if the sun wished to soften the wounds carved into the city. Miss Marple stood once again at the old bus stopper cane steady, her eyes sharper than the warm light that washed over the cracked pavement. The strange carved symbol she had noticed the day before, 3 arrows converging toward a circle, seemed clearer now, as though the night had given it meaning. She brushed her fingers over it again. The grooves felt deliberate, deep, purposeful. Just then, a quiet voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't touch that, ma'am." Miss Marple turned. A young man, perhaps 19 or 20, stood near the lamppost, clutching a stack of pamphlets against his chest. His clothes were simple, but his eyes carried a fire he could barely hide. "And why not, dear?" she asked politely. He glanced around to ensure no one was watching. That mark, it's a message for those who march. March, Miss Marple repeated softly. For freedom, he whispered. For justice. He hesitated before adding, that symbol was used by a group of local volunteers who organized secret bus route protests after Rosa Parks was arrested. It means meeting point. Miss Marple felt her heart tighten not with fear, but with admiration. How quietly courage lived in these streets. Are you a volunteer as well? She asked. He gave a shy, sad smile. I was, until last month, when my friend disappeared. Disappeared. The word cut through the warm air like a blade. Before she could ask more, he stepped back nervously. I shouldn't talk here. They watch everything. Who? She pressed gently. The people who want history to stay silent, he whispered. Then he hurried away. Miss Marple watched him go, the pamphlets trembling slightly in his hands. Another clue. Another heartbeat of the city calling her deeper. The carved symbol wasn't random, and the boy's lost friend wasn't a coincidence. Later that day, Miss Marple walked to a small cafe recommended by the university. A humble place with mismatched chairs, the sharp smell of coffee, and a quiet sadness that clung to its walls. The moment she entered, conversations paused just for a breath before resuming. Miss Marple, with her familiar warmth, offered a small nod to everyone near her. She chose a seat near the window, hoping to observe without intruding. A waitress approached a middle-aged black woman with tired eyes, yet a smile gentle enough to break any barrier. Good morning, ma'am, she said kindly. Coffee, yes, dear. And perhaps a small conversation, if you're not too busy. The woman raised an eyebrow, half amused. You don't look like the kind of lady who travels all the way to Montgomery for just a talk. Miss Marple smiled. You'd be surprised how far truth makes us travel. The woman laughed softly, but her eyes grew serious. You're asking about the bus stop, aren't you? Miss Marple paused. Why do you think that? Strangers only notice the symbol when they're searching for something or someone. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle. I believe someone is in danger, perhaps already harmed. The waitress sighed, glancing toward the door before speaking in a hushed tone. That symbol, it belonged to a girl named Evelyn. Brave, too brave for her age. She left messages all over the city to guide young marchers to safe spots. Her voice wavered. She's the one the boy must have told you about. She went missing 3 weeks ago. Missing, Miss Marple whispered. No one talks about it, the woman replied. Police call it runaway behavior, but the community knows better. She lowered her voice further. They say she had proof names of people secretly working with those who wanted to stop the movement. Proof, Miss Marple repeated, like the burned note she had received. The woman straightened suddenly as a white officer entered the cafe. Every muscle in the room stiffened. The officer approached the counter with slow, heavy steps. Anything unusual today? He asked the waitress. No, sir, she said instantly without looking at Miss Marple. Miss Marple observed the fear coating the air like dust. It wasn't the officer himself. It was the authority behind him, an unspoken warning. Truth was dangerous here. Very dangerous. That afternoon, as Miss Marple walked toward the university building, she sensed someone following her light footsteps, hesitant, familiar. The young man from the bus stop emerged from around the corner, breathing fast. Ma'am, I shouldn't be here, but I need to tell you something. Miss Marple gave him a reassuring nod. You're safe with me. He shook his head quickly. No one is safe here, not when they start asking questions. Who is they? She asked softly. He swallowed hard. They call themselves community protectors, but they're really informants. They blend in store owners, teachers, even church members. They report anything suspicious to authorities who want to stop the Marshes and Evelyn. Miss Marple asked. The boy's eyes filled with pain. She kept a diary. She wrote everything in it: names, plans, threats. She told me she hid it somewhere after receiving a warning. Miss Marple felt her breath slow. A diary. A young volunteer's truth book. It matched perfectly with her anonymous burned note. Do you know where the diary is? She asked gently. He shook his head. No, but she left symbols to guide anyone looking for it, like the one at the bus stop. He paused. There's another one, near the old courthouse. Before Miss Marple could respond, he stepped back again. Fear trembled across his face. Ma'am, please be careful. People disappear for knowing less than this. Then he vanished into the crowd like a shadow swallowed by sunlight. Miss Marple stood still. Her heartbeat remained combat. Her mind moved like a storm. A diary, symbols, informants. The truth wasn't silent, it was hidden, and someone was desperate to bury it. Late afternoon painted the courthouse in soft gold, but the beauty couldn't mask the building's reputation. This was the place where countless injustices had been, legalized through polite signatures and cold laws. Miss Marple climbed the steps slowly. Tourists passed by with cameras, unaware of the tension that lived in the stone beneath their feet. She searched quietly, observing every pillar, every bench, every patch of peeling paint. And then there it was. Another symbol, fainter, partially scratched out, as if someone had tried to erase it quickly. 3 arrows, 1 circle, but this time, beside it was a second marker, small line pointing downward, almost like an arrow indicating direction. Miss Marple followed its path with her eyes to the base of the steps. There, wedged between 2 stones, was a small torn piece of notebook paper. She bent slowly and retrieved it. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of recognition. The handwriting matched the burned note. The scrap read, "If anything happens to me, follow the marks." Miss Marple closed her eyes just briefly as emotion tightened her chest. This wasn't a game. This was a cry for help from a girl who knew she might disappear. Miss Marple whispered, "I will follow them, my dear, I promise." Evening settled over Montgomery, gentle but uneasy. Miss Marple walked back to her guest room, her steps calm but her mind burning with new understanding. As she unlocked her door, she sensed it against someone watching. Across the street, a figure leaned against a lamppost, still, expressionless, unmoving. Miss Marple pretended not to notice and stepped inside. Once the door shut, she allowed her breath to deepen. Fear didn't guide, her awareness did. Someone had been monitoring her since morning, and not just her. The volunteers, the supporters, the truth seekers, every one of them lived under invisible eyes. She unfolded the torn paper again. Follow the marks. The diary was real. Evelyn's disappearance was intentional. The movement was in danger. And someone with power was trying to erase the truth before it could reach the world. Miss Marple sat at her small wooden desk, the lamplight warm against her calm face. Her investigation was no longer about a symbol. It was about a life, a struggle, a silenced voice that deserved to be heard. And tomorrow she would begin searching for the next mark. Outside, the watcher remained under the lamppost. Inside, Miss Marple whispered, "Truth may be hidden, but it always leaves breadcrumbs, and I intend to follow every single one." Chapter 3. Birmingham's Fragile Peace. Children on the front lines. Miss Marple left Montgomery early the next morning, the sky still pale with first light. The train to Birmingham rattled calmly, yet every turn of the wheels felt like it carried her deeper into a place where history breathed through every brick and wound. Birmingham was not just another city. It was a battlefield where children had marched, where fire hoses had roared, and where hope struggled to stay alive under the heavy boot of hatred. As the train slowed near the station, Miss Marple noticed boarded windows, narrow alleyways etched with soot, and small groups of people walking with purpose but keeping their voices low. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was protected. She stepped off the train with her small suitcase. Her cane tapped gently against the cracked pavement, a soft rhythm against the city's hidden tremors. A poster fluttered on a lamppost nearby. It showed silhouettes of young marchers' children linked arm in arm. Miss Marple touched the edge of the poster. "Even the young are forced to be brave here," she whispered. A school bell rang in the distance. It should have sounded ordinary. But in Birmingham, even a bell felt like it carried the weight of decisions far bigger than any child should ever bear. She had come to find the next symbol, the next clue in Evelyn's trail. But she already sensed that Birmingham would give her more than just a clue. It would give her a glimpse of the emotional heart of the movement. The next symbol, according to the torn clue, was near an old school, one of the places where children had once gathered before marching for freedom. When Miss Marple reached the school, she was struck by the strange contrast. Bright white walls, a fluttering American flag, and beneath it, fear. Parents stood near the gate, whispering anxiously. Their eyes watched the road, not out of boredom, but caution. Every stranger, every car, every sound felt like a possible threat. Miss Marple walked slowly toward the gate, observing the restless energy. That was when she saw her. A girl, around 14, sat on the edge of the brick fence, her schoolbooks clutched to her chest. Her shoes were worn, her braids neatly tied, and her eyes, those eyes held a courage far beyond her years. Miss Marple approached with a soft smile. "You look thoughtful, my dear." The girl lifted her gaze. Her voice trembled slightly. "Are you Miss Marple?" Almost no one here should have known her name, yet this girl did. "Yes," Miss Marple said gently. "How do you know me?" The girl looked over her shoulder before whispering, "Evelyn told me about you." A cold shiver passed through Miss Marple, not of fear, but of connection. "Did she speak to you before she disappeared?" Miss Marple asked. The girl nodded slowly. "She said she was leaving marked symbols because she was being followed. She said if anything happened, someone wise would come looking." Miss Marple's throat tightened with emotion. "And she said," the girl continued, "that truth needs protectors, even children." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "What is your name, dear?" "Ada." "Do you know where the next symbol is?" Ada hesitated. Then she pointed toward the back of the school building. "It's behind the music room," she said. "She carved it there the day before she disappeared." She looked scared, but determined. Miss Marple looked into the girl's eyes and saw a mix of fear and burning hope. The same fire she had seen in the young volunteer in Montgomery. Children were standing on the front lines because adults refused to listen, and Miss Marple felt her heart break a little at the truth. Behind the school building, the ground was uneven and still damp with last night's rain. The music room stood in a quiet corner, its paint peeling, but its presence warm, as if the walls still remembered the songs of young voices. Miss Marple walked toward the back wall, her cane tapping softly. It didn't take long to find the mark. The symbol was carved deeper, here more, desperate hand. Beside it, another faint shape, a small drawing of a bell. Beneath it, scratched in quick strokes, were the words, Listen, then follow the sound. Miss Marple traced the carving with trembling fingers. Evelyn had been frightened, yet still brave enough to leave a message for whoever might come after her. Ada joined her quietly. She carved it during music practice, the girl whispered. She said songs hide truths adults can't speak. Miss Marple looked up at the music room window. A soft hum drifted out. A teacher singing gently with a group of girls inside. The sound was warm, too warm for a place that had seen so much pain. Ada noticed Miss Marple's expression. You want to know about the bell, don't you? Yes, dear. Ada motioned for her to follow. Behind the school stood a small shed, half broken and forgotten. Above it hung an old bronze bell, rusted yet dignified. The teachers used to ring it to gather the children before the marches, Ada explained. But after the police raids, they stopped using it. Miss Marple looked at the bell closely. There underneath, the rim was another symbol, smaller, almost invisible. A tiny arrow pointing sideways, toward the alley behind the school. Miss Marple felt her heart tighten. The trail continued. The alley behind the school was narrow and quiet. Too quiet. Miss Marple's instincts sharpened. This wasn't a place where a girl should have walked alone. Halfway down the alley, she noticed scuff marks on the wall, drag marks, faint fingerprints, a sign of struggle. Ada, Miss Marple said softly, did Evelyn ever come here alone? Ada nodded reluctantly. She came here to hide leaflets. She said someone was watching her at school. Miss Marple knelt to examine the wall. The broken pieces of brick told a silent story, one of fear and force. Ada, she asked, why didn't anyone report her missing? Tears filled the girl's eyes. They said it was better not to speak. That talking brings trouble. That she probably ran away like others. Miss Marple swallowed a surge of anger. Children were disappearing, and adults were silencing themselves to survive. Ada, did Evelyn tell you anything else? Ada looked around nervously before whispering. She said she found out who in Birmingham was giving information about the marches to the police. Someone trusted. Someone everyone believed was a friend. Miss Marple froze. A betrayer within the movement. Someone feeding names of children and volunteers. Do you know who it was? Miss Marple asked quietly. Ada shook her head. She only said, the truth sings louder when danger grows. I don't know what she meant. Miss Marple understood. The clue wasn't just the symbol. It was the music, the songs, the children's choir. This wasn't just a trail of carvings. It was a trail of voice. Miss Marple returned to the music room with Ada by her side. The choir was finishing a powerful hymn, voices trembling yet soaring. The teacher, a kind-faced woman, noticed them at the door. Can I help you? She asked softly. Miss Marple stepped forward. I believe one of your former students left a message here, Evelyn. The teacher froze. Emotion flickered across her face, pain she had clearly tried to bury. She was special, the teacher whispered. She carried fear like a secret weight, but she never let it break her spirit. Do you know what happened to her? Miss Marple asked. The teacher hesitated, then tears filled her eyes. I know only this, she whispered. She confided in me that she had discovered the name of the man feeding information to the authorities. Miss Marple's breath caught. Who is it? The teacher shook her head slowly. She never told me. She said she needed proof. She said she hid it. But the next day, she was gone. The room fell silent. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on her arm. We will find her truth, I promise. Outside, the choir began singing again. Soft, trembling voices carrying hope through the cracked windows. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a brief moment. The sound felt like Evelyn's whisper carried through the air. Listen, then follow the sound. The next symbol, the next clue, the next truth. They were waiting somewhere in Birmingham, and Miss Marple would not leave until she found them. Chapter 4. The Night Vigil in the Church. A voice not yet silenced. Night settled over Birmingham like a soft, uneasy blanket, too quiet for a city carrying so many wounds. Street lamps glowed dimly, their halos flickering as if afraid of the darkness they tried to push away. Miss Marple walked slowly toward St. Paul's Church, her cane tapping against the stone pavement. Ada had insisted she come to the evening vigil. Evelyn used to go there, the girl had said. She said the church songs held answers. Now, as Miss Marple approached the church, she immediately understood what Ada meant. St. Paul's wasn't grand or imposing. It was humble, its bricks old, its steeple slightly leaning, but it pulsed with something powerful, hope. A small crowd had gathered, mostly black families, some young volunteers, and a few elderly men holding candles cupped in their trembling hands. Their faces were lined with a mixture of exhaustion and unstoppable determination. As she stepped inside, warm candlelight brushed her face, illuminating rows of wooden pews and a simple cross behind the altar. The air felt heavy, almost sacred. A woman at the door handed her a candle. "Bless you for coming," she whispered. Inside, the church filled with quiet hums voices, softly warming up for the hymn. But beneath the warmth, Miss Marple sensed something else, a subtle tension, a quiet watchfulness, a feeling that not everyone present was there for prayer. She held the candle close, letting its warmth soothe her, but her mind stayed alert. Someone inside this church knew something about Evelyn, and someone else might want to keep that truth hidden. The vigil began with a soft hum, a few voices trembling into the air. Miss Marple sat near the center, shoulders slightly hunched, listening with her full heart. The choir, small children, teenagers, and elderly women stood near the altar. They sang quietly at first, their voices barely more than whispers, but gradually, like flames being fanned, their voices rose. "We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday." Emotions surged through the church, pain, hope, defiance. History all merging into something larger than any one person could hold. Miss Marple felt tears prick her eyes. This was not just a song. It was a heartbeat shared by an entire community. As the hymn continued, Miss Marple noticed patterns, a pause here, a whispered cue between two choir members, a slight nod from the pianist. It wasn't random, it was communication. Evelyn had said, "Songs hide truths adults can't speak." Miss Marple leaned forward. The choir reached the second verse, when suddenly, one girl's voice quivered sharply like a note breaking from fear. Miss Marple followed her gaze. A man stood at the back of the church, arms crossed, face emotionless, watching, not praying, not singing, just watching. Miss Marple recognized the posture at once. Authority pretending to be invisible. Her instincts sharpened. This man wasn't here for the vigil. He was here for information. The girl kept glancing nervously toward him, her hands shaking. Miss Marple realized something heartbreaking. Even in a place meant for safety, fear had found a way in. And perhaps Evelyn had sensed that before anyone else. After the hymn ended, people sat quietly, holding candles close as the pastor offered a brief prayer. Miss Marple bowed her head respectfully, though her thoughts were racing. When the prayer ended, people began lighting each other's candles, letting the soft glow spread like threads of unity. Miss Marple moved gently between rows until she reached the pew where Evelyn supposedly sat during vigils. She knelt slowly, pretending to adjust her shoe, and let her hand glide along the underside of the wooden pew. Her fingers touched something rough. Carvings. Her heart quickened. She leaned closer. Yes, Evelyn had carved another symbol, small but clear under the dim light. 3 arrows, a circle, and beneath it a new shape, a tear, a small carved teardrop. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a moment. Evelyn must have carved this with trembling hands, sitting right here during a vigil, perhaps knowing she was running out of time. The tear wasn't just a symbol, it was a message. Pain, danger, urgency. Miss Marple touched the carving gently, as if comforting the frightened girl. A voice suddenly whispered beside her, "You're looking for Evelyn's marks." Miss Marple turned to find an elderly man seated near the end of the pew. He held his candle with steady hands, his face lined with wisdom and sorrow. "Yes," she replied softly, "I'm trying to find the truth." He nodded slowly. She used to sit right there every week. Brave little soul. Quiet, but she saw more than any of us realized. "Did she ever say anything about feeling threatened?" Miss Marple asked. His eyes darkened. She didn't need to say it. We all saw the way certain men watched her, especially when she handed out leaflets or spoke to new volunteers. Did she mention who those men were? He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the back. "The one tonight," he whispered. "He's been here before." Miss Marple's breath tightened. The watcher, the silent threat. Evelyn had left a tear-shaped mark because she knew danger had entered even this sacred space. The truth was still singing, but it was trembling. As the vigil ended and candles began to dim, Miss Marple approached the choir loft. Children folded their sheet music, whispering to each other, packing their tiny bags with movements that seemed to mature for their age. She noticed the girl whose voice had faltered earlier, the one who had kept glancing toward the man at the back. Miss Marple approached her with a gentle, grandmotherly smile. "My dear, your voice carries something very special, something honest." The girl managed a thin smile. Her eyes darted again toward the back of the church, where the man still lingered. "Do you know Evelyn?" Miss Marple asked softly. The girl's breath caught. Her hand tightened around her music folder. "She used to sit with us," she whispered. "She said the choir was the safest place to leave messages." Miss Marple's heartbeat quickened. "Messages." The girl nodded. "There's a room behind the choir loft, a storage room for old hymn books. Evelyn hid something there once. She told me to never go inside unless she didn't come back." The ache in Miss Marple's chest deepened. "Will you show me?" she asked. The girl hesitated, but then nodded slowly. They climbed the narrow stairs to the loft, the hymn books forming neat stacks along the walls. The girl pointed toward a small wooden door, half hidden behind a curtain. "She said she put something inside," the girl whispered. "Something important." Miss Marple opened the creaking door. A small dusty room filled with old hymnals and broken candle holders, and there tucked between two hymn books was a folded piece of paper. Miss Marple's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. It was Evelyn's handwriting. "The truth is hidden in songs, but someone is trying to erase the music. If they silence our voices, they will silence everything." Miss Marple felt her throat tighten. Below the message was one more symbol, a tear, a circle, a cross, a warning, a cry for help, a final clue. When Miss Marple and the girl stepped back into the main hall, the church was nearly empty, except for one person. The man from the back still stood near the side, exit watching, waiting. His gaze slid toward Miss Marple, cold and calculating. Miss Marple offered him a polite nod, as if unaware of the storm rising within her. He didn't return it. He simply turned and disappeared into the night. The girl's voice trembled. He scares everyone, even the pastor. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. My dear, fear grows when no one confronts it, but we will confront it. The girl looked at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Will you find Evelyn? Miss Marple inhaled deeply, her resolve settling into her bones. Yes, she whispered. I will follow her truth, and I will not let it be silenced. Outside, the night felt colder, but Miss Marple's heart held a flame that would not go out. Evelyn had trusted her messages to music, to symbols, to children, because she believed someone would understand. And Miss Marple did. She stepped into the night, the vigil candle still warm in her hand. Next stop, Selma, where the footsteps of the brave still echoed, where Evelyn's next clue awaited. Chapter 5, Selma, the footsteps of the brave. The road from Birmingham to Selma was long, quiet, and lined with weary fields that had seen more sorrow than harvest. Miss Marple sat near the window of the small bus, the landscape passing slowly like scenes from a story written in pain and perseverance. Selma was different. She felt it even before the bus entered the city limits. Where Birmingham trembled with suppressed fear, Selma breathed a heavy, determined silence, like a community preparing itself again and again for the next blow. As she stepped off the bus, the air felt heavier, the streets more worn, and every shadow seemed to hold stories that refused to fade. The Edmund Pettus Bridge rose in the distance. Its arch was simple, yet it carried the weight of history. A place where peaceful marchers had been beaten, where hope had bled, where courage had refused to die. Miss Marple paused to take it in, the wind brushing lightly against her coat. She had solved many mysteries, but none whose clues were carved in human suffering. She tightened her grip on her cane. The next trail of Evelyn's marks would be here. She could feel it. Near the bridge, a small group of volunteers stood in a quiet circle. Some held handmade signs, some simply held hands. Their faces were calm, but their eyes carried storms. A young woman among them noticed Miss Marple and approached with a gentle smile. Are you here for the memorial walk, ma'am? No, dear Miss Marple replied softly. I'm here to listen, and perhaps to find something lost. The woman's smile faltered slightly, replaced with curiosity and caution. In Selma, many things get lost, but most leave traces if you know how to look. Miss Marple nodded. That was what she relied on. Traces, and Selma was full of them. Miss Marple began walking toward the bridge, her steps slow, deliberate. The closer she came, the louder the echoes felt echoes, not heard through ears, but through the soul. The boards beneath her shoes creaked softly. She stopped in the center, letting the wind wash over her. Children had marched here. Women with trembling hands had marched here. Old men with bent backs but unbroken spirits had marched here. And they had been met with hatred. Miss Marple imagined it. The shouts, the fear, the rush of boots, the heavy thud of batons. A lump formed in her throat. Then she saw it. Near the base of the railing, carved faintly into the metal, 3 arrows, a circle, Evelyn's symbol. Miss Marple knelt carefully, tracing the marking with a trembling fingertip. This one was rougher, carved quickly, in fear or urgency. Below, it was another small symbol. A broken line. Not a tear this time, a fracture. As if Evelyn had wanted to say, something is about to break. Miss Marple straightened slowly. The wind felt colder now. Footsteps approached behind her. You're the lady from Birmingham, a voice said gently. She turned to find the young woman from earlier. Her face now looked more serious, her eyes darker with unspoken knowledge. "You recognize this symbol?" Miss Marple said quietly. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Evelyn came to Selma often. She worked with some of our volunteers. She left marks whenever she felt watched. Was she watched here as well?" Miss Marple asked. A painful smile touched the woman's lips. "In Selma, everyone who tries to change things is watched." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Evelyn was scared the last time she came. She said she discovered someone leaking names of marchers to certain authorities. She said the betrayal was closer than we all believed. The same story, the same fear, the same hidden enemy." Miss Marple felt her heart brace itself. "Do you know where she went after she left the bridge?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes," the woman replied. "She went to the chapel where the volunteers gather. She said she needed to hide something important there." The diary. Miss Marple exhaled slowly. Another step on the trail. The chapel was small and wooden, painted white, though time had faded it into a weary cream. Volunteers often used it to train for marches, to organize routes, to pray, to breathe. Inside, the silence felt protective. Soft sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, scattering gentle colors across the floorboards. Miss Marple walked down the aisle, her shoes brushing against floorboards worn from thousands of determined steps. At the front pew, she knelt, her eyes scanning for markings. Nothing. She stood and examined the pulpit. Still nothing. Then she saw it faint, nearly hidden beneath a rug near the altar. 3 arrows, a circle, and beneath it, a small symbol that looked like a river. Miss Marple's breath caught. A river. The Alabama River ran directly behind the chapel. Evelyn was pointing toward the riverbank. She stepped outside quickly but carefully. The young woman who had been guiding her followed. "You think she left something by the water?" the woman asked. "Yes," Miss Marple replied softly. "I believe she left a clue, or perhaps hid something she feared would be discovered." They walked along the quiet edge of the river. Trees leaned over the water, their reflections trembling on the surface. Then Miss Marple saw it a small wooden step leading down toward the edge, half covered by overgrown weeds. She approached slowly. Something glinted faintly beneath the step. Her heart thudded. She knelt and lifted the wooden plank. There, wrapped in cloth and tied with a fading ribbon, was a small notebook, Evelyn's diary. Miss Marple unwrapped it slowly, her fingers trembling. The cover was simple, worn, and water-stained. The first page shook her deeply. "If you are reading this, I may already be gone. But please, do not let the truth die with me." Tears pricked Miss Marple's eyes, not tears of fear, but of compassion, grief, and a rising fire of determination. She turned the page. The next words were even heavier. "The betrayer is among us." Before Miss Marple could read further, the young woman gasped softly. "You shouldn't read it here," she whispered urgently. "The river path is not always safe. People follow strangers, especially strangers asking questions." Miss Marple closed the diary gently. "You're right, dear. We must be cautious." But before they could step back toward the chapel, Miss Marple heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching through the trees. She tensed. The woman whispered, "Don't turn. Keep walking." But Miss Marple had faced danger before, perhaps not physical danger, but the danger of lies, of cruelty, of hidden malice. She sensed the presence behind them, a heavy breathing, a quiet watchfulness, just like the man in the church, just like the ones who followed Evelyn. Miss Marple did not turn. but her voice remained steady as she spoke to the young woman. "Does Selma know who Evelyn feared?" The woman's voice cracked. "We suspect, but no one speaks the name. Fear keeps people quiet." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Fear is powerful," she whispered, "but truth is patient, and it always finds a way." The footsteps stopped. The watcher was close. Too close. Miss Marple tightened her grip on the diary inside her coat. They walked back toward the chapel with controlled calm. She did not look back, because she didn't need to. She knew the watcher would return, and she knew this was only the beginning. Back inside the chapel, Miss Marple finally opened Evelyn's diary again. The pages were filled with hurried handwriting, smudges, and incomplete thoughts, as if the girl wrote in fear, always looking over her shoulder. Miss Marple read silently while the young woman stood guard at the door. "Someone inside the movement is working against us. They attend meetings. They know our routes. They send names to those who want to stop the marches. I must expose them, but I must be careful." Miss Marple's heart squeezed painfully. This girl, this child, had carried a burden even adults couldn't bear. Then she reached a page that made her breath falter. A name, half scribbled, half seeressed, as if Evelyn had begun writing it but panicked. The first letter was clear. T. Miss Marple's mind raced. Her memories aligned. Her instincts sharpened. T. Terence Hale, the man who had met her at the Montgomery train station. The man whose smile never reached his eyes. The man who had lied about the letter. Was it him, or someone else with the same initial? Miss Marple closed the diary slowly, her mind steady. There was more to uncover. Much more. But she also knew this. Evelyn had trusted her symbols, her bravery, her voice, and now that voice was in Miss Marple's hands. She placed the diary close to her heart and whispered, "I will not fail you, my dear." Outside, the Alabama River flowed quietly under the moonlight, carrying secrets, courage, and the footsteps of the brave. Miss Marple turned toward the door. Her next destination awaited. The highway march from Selma to Montgomery, where truth and danger would collide. Chapter 6. The March Toward Truth. Highway 80 Journey. Dawn stretched gently across Selma, painting the sky in soft gold as Miss Marple stood at the beginning of Highway 80, legendary road where countless marchers had once taken steps of defiance and hope. Today, smaller groups still walked portions of the route, honoring those who had marched before them and quietly planning the next demonstration. Miss Marple felt something unusual in the air. Not merely tension, not merely fear, a waiting, as if the road itself knew another truth was about to surface. She tightened her shawl and held the diary close beneath her coat. Evelyn's trembling words still echoed in her mind. "The betrayer is among us." Beside her stood the young woman who had guided her in Selma Mary. Her expression held both sadness and strength. "The marchers planned a short walk today," Mary explained, "to remind people that we haven't given up. You'll walk with us." Miss Marple nodded. "I think the road wants to speak, and I want to listen." Together they stepped onto the highway. The pavement was warm under the rising sun. Every crack in the road felt like a scarsome created by time, others by boots, others by hatred. Volunteers, young and old, joined the line. Some held small signs. Some carried no signs at all, only memories of those who couldn't walk beside them anymore. As they moved forward, Miss Marple noticed a few men scattered along the roadside, watching, not marching, not supportive, just watching. Mary whispered, "Ignore them. They want us scared." But Miss Marple didn't ignore them. She remembered Evelyn's half-written name, T. And she remembered the man at the church, and the man behind the trees near the river, and the cold stare that followed her in Montgomery. Here, on Highway 80, she felt him again, invisible but present. The betrayer walked with them more, watched from the shadows. A mile into the march, the group paused under a line of tall oak trees where volunteers had set up water stations. Children ran around, handing out paper cups, their smiles bright despite the heavy world around them. One little boy approached Miss Marple shyly. "For you, ma'am," he said, offering a cup. She accepted it, smiling warmly. "What's your name, dear?" "Jerome. My daddy marched the first time. He said we walk so nobody forgets." Miss Marple's heart softened. "Your father is a brave man." Jerome grinned. "He says being brave is just being scared and doing it anyway." Mary leaned close and whispered, "Children understand this movement better than most adults." Miss Marple nodded. Children had always held truths adults tried to bury. As the group prepared to continue the march, Miss Marple spotted something odd on the side of a volunteer's wagon, faint chalk markings on the wooden frame. She stepped closer. 3 arrows, a circle. Evelyn's mark. Her heart thudded. Mary asked quietly, "What is it?" Miss Marple pointed to the symbol. "This means Evelyn was here, perhaps during the planning of a march." Mary inhaled sharply. She must have left something else. Miss Marple inspected the wagon carefully and found, just under the wheel frame, another small symbol. A broken line pointing northeastward, the woods that bordered the highway. Mary's face paled. She went into the woods, alone. Perhaps she hid something, Miss Marple replied quietly. Or she saw something that frightened her. They stepped slightly away from the group to peer into the trees. The woods were dense but quiet. Too quiet. And Miss Marple felt eyes watching from within. Not Evelyn's. Someone else's. The group continued marching. But Miss Marple and Mary followed the direction of the marking, walking slowly along the highway edge, closer to the tree line. Miss Marple paused at a spot where the grass was flattened in irregular shapes. Someone had stepped here, perhaps struggled here. Evelyn's trail grew colder but clearer. Mary whispered, "Should we go in?" Miss Marple took a breath. Yes, but carefully. They stepped between the trees. Inside the woods, the air changed. It felt still, heavy. The sunlight barely reached through the branches. Miss Marple moved with slow, deliberate steps, scanning every trunk, every patch of soil, every shadow. She saw it before Mary did. A third mark, carved into the bark of a tall oak. 3 arrows, a circle, and beneath it, another shape, a narrow eye. Miss Marple touched it. "An eye," she murmured. She felt watched. Mary held her breath. "Do you think she was chased?" Miss Marple didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Further ahead, they found a small indentation in the earth, those like a hiding place behind large roots. In the hollow lay a torn scrap of paper. With trembling fingers, Miss Marple lifted it. The handwriting was Evelyn's. "If they find this, they'll know I know. But someone must stop them. Watch the man who stands alone." Mary looked at Miss Marple fearfully. "Do you know who she means?" Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. Yes, she had seen him, at the church, near the river, and now she sensed him near. As if summoned by her realization, a twig snapped somewhere behind them. Miss Marple straightened, but she didn't turn. Fear lived in sudden movements. Strength lived in calmness. She whispered to Mary, "Walk, slowly, now." They stepped out of the woods, and back onto the road where the marchers were still moving forward. Miss Marple did not look back, but she felt the gaze, cold, steady, hunting. As Miss Marple and Mary rejoined the march, a man moved toward them from the side of the road, tall, broad-shouldered, expressionless. Not the same man from Birmingham, but similar. A watcher, a messenger, a threat. "Ladies," he said with a stiff nod. "You two wandered off the path. Dangerous out here." Miss Marple smiled politely. "Thank you for your concern. We are quite fine." Mary's hands trembled slightly, hidden behind her sign. The man's eyes narrowed. "Be sure you stay with the group. People get lost in the woods." Miss Marple kept her expression gentle. "Yes, but some people also get lost in darker places." His jaw tightened. She had struck something. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You ain't from around here. Best not involve yourself in things that don't concern you." Miss Marple looked straight into his eyes, calm and unwavering. "I involve myself wherever truth is being suffocated." A flick of fear or anger passed through the man's face. Then he stepped back. "Good day, ma'am." He walked away, but Miss Marple knew he wasn't leaving. He was repositioning. Mary exhaled shakily. "He knows we found something." Miss Marple touched her arm gently. "He suspects, but suspicion is not yet danger. We must stay vigilant." Yet she knew this encounter was no coincidence. Someone was tightening the circle around Evelyn's secrets, and now around Miss Marple. At the end of the march, volunteers gathered near a small rest area. People sang quietly, tended to blistered feet, and shared bread and water. Miss Marple and Mary found a bench and opened Evelyn's diary once again. Miss Marple turned to the pages near the scribbled name, and there, tucked between two pages, was something they hadn't noticed before. A folded map, hand-drawn, incomplete, but unmistakably important. It showed several locations marked with Evelyn's symbols: the bus stop in Montgomery, the church in Birmingham, the chapel in Selma, the riverbank, and now Highway 80. But something else was marked too. A name, not fully written, but clear enough. "T. Hale," Mary gasped. "That's..." "Yes," Miss Marple whispered. "Terence Hale, the man who welcomed me in Montgomery." The betrayer wasn't a rumor anymore. He was real, and he was close. Miss Marple closed the diary gently. "We leave for Atlanta tomorrow," she said quietly. "Evelyn's trail leads there next." Mary nodded, though fear clouded her expression. Miss Marple looked out at the sunset darkening over Highway 80. The journey was becoming more dangerous, but Evelyn's voice, her courage, was guiding every step, and Miss Marple would follow it to the end. Chapter 7. Atlanta. The house of a dreamer. Atlanta felt different the moment Miss Marple stepped off the train. Not lighter, no. The burden of injustice still hovered everywhere, but warmer, as though the city carried a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. It was the home of Martin Luther King Jr., a place where dreams were spoken aloud even when danger shadowed every street. A place where truth blossomed despite the constant threat of being cut down. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl as she walked through the station. Unlike Selma and Birmingham, people here moved with a mixture of caution and boldness. Some smiled at each other with silent solidarity, while others kept their heads low, watching for unseen eyes. Mary, who had insisted on accompanying her to Atlanta, stood beside her. "Dr. King's team meets in a house not far from here," she explained. Evelyn visited before. She said she felt safe there. Safe. Miss Marple repeated the word in her mind, though she doubted Evelyn had felt safe anywhere in her final days. As they walked through the busy street, Miss Marple spotted a familiar sensation. She was being watched, not just by strangers noticing an elderly woman in an unfamiliar city. No. Someone was tracking her movement deliberately. She leaned closer to Mary. "Walk with purpose, dear, but do not look behind." Mary stiffened. "Is it him?" Miss Marple didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth hovered behind them like a shadow. They reached a quiet residential road lined with pecan trees. At the far end stood a modest white house with a small porch, humble, unassuming, but known across Atlanta as a planning hub for civil rights leaders. Miss Marple felt a shift inside her. This was a place where strategies were whispered, dangers anticipated, and dreams protected. And somewhere within these walls lived a truth Evelyn had trusted. A young man opened the door before they could knock. His eyes were sharp, but warm, the kind of man who had seen too much and yet refused to stop fighting. "You must be Miss Marple," he said immediately. "We've been expecting you." Miss Marple blinked in surprise. "You have?" He nodded. "Evelyn mentioned you. Said if anything happened to her, a woman with clear eyes and a quiet mind would come looking." Emotion tightened Miss Marple's throat. "Then she had far more faith in me than she should have," she murmured. "Not faith," he replied softly. "Understanding." He led them inside. The house was alive with activity. Volunteers discussing routes, students drafting letters, older women preparing food for tired marchers. The atmosphere was heavy with urgency, but also with unity. Miss Marple felt it immediately, current of determination flowing through every conversation. A woman in her late 30s approached. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her clothes simple but dignified. "I'm Rosa Johnson," she said kindly. "Evelyn stayed with us for a few days. She was extraordinary." Mary lowered her head, emotion trembling across her face. "Did you know she was in danger?" Rosa sighed deeply. "Everyone in this movement is in danger. But Evelyn, she uncovered something others didn't dare to touch." Miss Marple opened the diary gently. She believed someone was betraying the movement from within. Rosa's expression hardened. Evelyn suspected the same. She said she had proof, but before she could show us, she disappeared. Miss Marple's voice remained steady. She left symbols behind, messages, and a map with the initial T. Rosa exchanged a troubled glance with the young man. That initial "it" could refer to him. Rosa whispered, "Terence Hale." Miss Marple's expression didn't change, but her pulse tightened. "Yes," she said softly, "I believe so." Rosa nodded slowly. "He pretends to support voter registration efforts, but we've felt something wrong about him. Evelyn followed him once." Mary inhaled sharply. Did she see something? Rosa hesitated. Then she whispered. She said he met with people who wanted to stop the marches. The room fell silent. Miss Marple felt the truth settle like a stone. Evelyn had been close, terribly close to revealing Hale's double role, and she had left her trail of symbols so someone could finish what she began. Rosa led Miss Marple and Mary into a quiet back room, once used by Dr. King for private discussions. The walls were lined with books, philosophy, theology, politics, and the desk held neatly stacked papers awaiting review. Miss Marple stepped inside reverently. The air itself felt wiser, steadier. Evelyn spent time here, Rosa explained. She admired Dr. King deeply, said his words gave her courage. And she left something. Miss Marple asked. Rosa nodded. Yes, we didn't move it. We thought whoever came looking for her would need it. She pointed to the side of the wooden bookshelf. Miss Marple approached, her fingers brushing the smooth wood until she felt it a tiny rough carving. 3 arrows, a circle, Evelyn's mark. Beneath it was another symbol, a small open book. Miss Marple leaned closer. A book, or perhaps a clue to literature. Rosa nodded. She often said truth hides in wisdom. Maybe she meant Dr. King's writings. Miss Marple approached the desk. A single notebook lay open. On the corner of the page, barely visible under the lamp's soft glow, was a faint pencil mark. Page 54. She turned the page slowly. Her breath caught. A handwritten quote, added by Evelyn herself, sat in the margin. Those who betray justice do so because they fear the truth. And beneath it, I saw him pass a document. The meeting was not accidental. Miss Marple felt a chill. A document. A secret meeting. A witness. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps sounded outside the office door. Mary held her breath. Rosa's eyes narrowed. Miss Marple calmly closed the notebook. "Someone followed us here," she whispered. Rosa nodded slowly. "That happens more often than we like." As they stepped out of the office, Miss Marple immediately spotted him. A tall man wearing a dark hat stood near the doorway, pretending to inspect a bulletin board. He didn't belong here, not with his stiff posture, not with his guarded expression. Mary breathed. "That's him. The one from Selma." Miss Marple quietly approached him, her cane tapping with controlled calm. "Good evening," she said pleasantly. The man turned slowly, stiffening at the sight of her. "I'm just waiting for someone," he muttered. Miss Marple offered a polite nod. "Yes, I imagine you are. But tell me, how long does a shadow wait before revealing who it follows?" His jaw tightened. "You should leave Atlanta, ma'am. Is that concern?" Miss Marple asked gently, "or a warning?" He stepped closer. "Some truths aren't safe to uncover." Miss Marple's gaze remained steady. And yet Evelyn uncovered them, and paid a price. Something flickered in the man's eye-sphere. Anger, recognition. He leaned in slightly. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Miss Marple whispered back, almost kindly, "I believe I do." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Rosa stepped forward, her voice sharp. "If you're here to intimidate us, you should know Atlanta isn't Selma. We don't hide." The man's eyes darted between them. Then he turned abruptly and left. Mary exhaled shakily. "I can't believe he followed us all the way here." Miss Marple's voice was calm but firm. "He isn't alone, and he isn't acting without orders." She touched the diary hidden inside her coat. "And the man giving those orders begins with a T." Evening deepened as volunteers packed up for the night. The house grew quieter, but tension still lingered like an unspoken warning. Miss Marple sat at a small writing table, Evelyn's diary open before her. She turned to the page with the half-written name again. T. Ha. A tear in the page, as if pulled away abruptly. Mary leaned over her shoulder. "Do you think Evelyn wrote more somewhere else?" Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think she left instructions inside this city." She traced Evelyn's symbols in the diary. The next location was marked subtly, a small star beside the word press. "The printing press," Miss Marple whispered. "The place where flyers and information spread." Rosa inhaled sharply. She went there 2 days before she disappeared. Miss Marple closed the diary with quiet determination. "Then tomorrow," she said, rising slowly, "we go to the printing press." Mary touched her arm gently. "Do you think we'll find the proof?" Miss Marple gazed at the diary's trembling handwriting. "I think Evelyn left everything we need. She trusted someone would finish what she could not." She looked toward the window. Night lay over Atlanta like a warning and a promise. Tomorrow would bring danger. Tomorrow would bring answers. And tomorrow, Terence Hale would no longer remain a shadow. Chapter 8. The Printing Press Mystery. Whispers in the Ink. Atlanta woke slowly the next morning, the streets still damp from the night's soft rain. Miss Marple stepped outside with Evelyn's diary tucked safely beneath her coat, the air cool against her cheeks. Mary walked beside her, nerves flickering through every step. "We should be careful today," Mary whispered. Miss Marple nodded. "Careful, yes, but not afraid. Fear clouds truth, and we must see clearly." The printing press Evelyn had visited lay on a quieter side of the city, a small building with faded red bricks and a narrow alley behind it. Flyers had been produced here for marches, meetings, and rallies. Words printed inside these walls had carried courage across entire states. But Evelyn had come here not for printing, but because she had discovered something dangerous. As they approached the building, Miss Marple noticed the door slightly ajar. Her instincts sharpened. "Mary," she whispered, "stay behind me." They stepped inside. The smell of ink and damp paper filled the air. Stacks of uncut flyers lay scattered across tables. The printing machine stood silent, its wheels still, as if frozen mid-thought. But something about the room felt disturbed: papers on the floor, an overturned chair, a faint mark on the wooden plank. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Someone had been here recently. Someone hurried. Someone searching. Mary whispered, "Do you think the man from the house followed us here?" Miss Marple didn't answer yet. She moved deeper into the room, her cane tapping lightly. Then she saw it. On the side of the printing machine, barely visible under dried ink splatters, Evelyn's symbol, 3 arrows, a circle, and beside it, a new mark. A quill, meaning writing, words, documents. Miss Marple felt a cold drop of realization. Evelyn had hidden something written, and someone was trying to find it first. Miss Marple bent near the printing machine, her fingers brushing the cold metal. "Look here," she whispered to Mary. Mary knelt beside her. That's Evelyn's mark. She must have come here terrified." "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, "and she wanted someone to look beneath the surface." Miss Marple studied the machine carefully. The rollers were smeared with ink, but the lower compartment had a thin crack, almost undetectable. She tapped it gently with her cane. "Hollow. Help me slide this forward," Miss Marple said softly. Together they pushed the heavy machine a few inches. Dust swirled up, and beneath the machine, a sliver of paper. Mary gasped. Miss Marple picked it up carefully. It was folded tightly, stained by ink and dirt, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Evelyn's. She unfolded it slowly. They printed false information to mislead the marchers. Someone altered the flyers. Someone inside the movement. Miss Marple's breath caught. False information. Mary whispered, "So the marchers were ambushed because someone changed the routes." "Yes," Miss Marple replied softly. "Someone knew where the marchers planned to be. Someone made sure the wrong information reached them." She turned the paper over. A second note was scribbled at the bottom. "I saw him hand the edited flyer to a man in uniform. His name starts with T." Mary's eyes widened. "That confirms it," she whispered. "Terence Hale." Miss Marple's heart grew heavy. "Yes, it seems Evelyn caught him altering information. A betrayal that put lives at risk." Footsteps suddenly echoed from the entrance. Miss Marple slid the note into her coat pocket immediately. "Someone's coming," Mary whispered, fear shaking her voice. Miss Marple lifted her cane, her posture calm, eyes sharp. A man entered, the same shadowed figure who had followed them from Birmingham to Atlanta. His presence filled the room with menace. "You two shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. Miss Marple answered gently, "And you shouldn't be following us." He took a step forward. "It's not safe. You're digging into things that will get you hurt." Mary's breath quickened. "You're threatening us," she said. "No," the man replied coldly. "I'm warning you." Miss Marple studied him carefully. His face was hard, but his eyes flickered with something: conflict, fear, hesitation. She spoke softly. "You're not the mastermind. You're following orders." He flinched. A tiny crack in the armor. Miss Marple stepped closer. "Who are you protecting?" Terence Hale, his jaw clenched. The silence was confirmation. Before he could react, voices sounded from outside. Volunteers were arriving. The man glared at Miss Marple. "This isn't over." Then he slipped out through the back door. Miss Marple let out a slow breath. "It's beginning," she whispered. "We're very close now." As volunteers entered the press, they paused, surprised to see Miss Marple and Mary inside. "What happened here?" One man asked. "Why is everything overturned?" Miss Marple replied calmly. "Someone was searching for something Evelyn left behind." A woman stepped forward, worry clouding her eyes. "Evelyn was terrified the last time she visited. She said she found evidence." Miss Marple nodded. "She did. She discovered flyers being altered." The group exchanged troubled glances. "We suspected sabotage," another volunteer said. "The marches were too predictable for the authorities. Someone gave them our plans." Miss Marple opened Evelyn's diary to a blank page, then noticed something strange: a torn edge, a missing page. "Mary, look at this." Mary gasped. "That page was there before." Miss Marple nodded. "And someone took it. Likely the same person who tore apart this place." A missing page meant missing evidence. But Miss Marple believed something strongly. Evelyn never relied on only one copy of anything important. She must have hidden another version. Miss Marple looked around the room. Her eyes landed on the shelves where unused paper was stacked neatly. She approached them slowly. Something about the arrangement bothered her. The top stack wasn't flush, one sheet stuck out slightly. She pulled it. Another folded paper, tucked so delicately it blended in perfectly. She unfolded it with care. Evelyn's handwriting again. "They want the movement to fall apart, but the truth will reveal them. If you find this, go to Washington. The last clue is there." Miss Marple closed her eyes gently. Washington. The march on Washington, where thousands gathered, where Dr. King spoke his dream, and where Evelyn had planned to deliver the final evidence before she disappeared. The volunteers gathered around Miss Marple as she explained what Evelyn had discovered. "So Terence Hale altered the flyers?" one man asked. "Yes," Miss Marple replied quietly. "He passed the altered version to men who wanted to silence the movement." Evelyn saw him and took notes. The room grew tense. Rosa, who had just arrived, stepped forward with fire in her voice. "That means Evelyn was killed or taken because she knew the truth." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "She risked everything." Miss Marple placed a steady hand on the girl's shoulder. She trusted that someone would continue her trail. Rosa wiped her eyes and asked, "What do we do now?" "We follow her last instruction," Miss Marple replied. "We go to Washington." But before they could speak further, the front door banged open. Terence Hale himself stood there, calm, smiling. "Ladies," he said warmly, "I hear you've been interfering with very important work." Mary froze. Rosa tensed. Miss Marple stepped forward, voice steady. We know what you did. Hale raised an eyebrow. My dear Miss Marple, I have no idea what you mean, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered toward the printing machine, toward the diary hidden under Miss Marple's coat. And then his smile cracked, just slightly. You're becoming a problem, he said softly. And problems disappear. Mary gasped, but Miss Marple did not move. Truth doesn't disappear, she whispered. It multiplies. Hale laughed quietly. We'll see. Then he left, stepping into the sunlight as though nothing had happened. But his exit carried a threat that lingered in the air. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the press windows as the volunteers gathered again. Miss Marple laid Evelyn's notes, symbols, and the recovered pages on a wooden table. Everything led to one final place, one final moment, one final confrontation. Mary whispered, "Do you think Evelyn meant the march on Washington?" Miss Marple nodded slowly. Yes, she knew the entire world would be watching. She wanted the truth exposed where it could not be hidden. Rose's voice trembled. Then we go with you. Miss Marple smiled sadly. This will be dangerous, dear. Mary straightened. So was everything she did. Miss Marple closed Evelyn's diary, her fingers lingering on the cover. This journey began with a burned note, she whispered, and it will end where the loudest voices gather. She looked at the group. In Washington, the truth will rise. Outside, the evening deepened. The city hummed with anticipation. Tomorrow, they would travel north, toward the mall, toward the Lincoln Memorial, toward the heart of a movement, where Evelyn's final clue awaited, where Terence Hale would make his last move, where Miss Marple would finish the path Evelyn began. Chapter 9. The March on Washington. Voices that could not be stopped. The train ride to Washington carried a strange, electric energy. Not fear, though danger traveled with them, but a deep, rising hope that felt stronger than anything Miss Marple had sensed on this journey so far. Mary sat beside her, hands folded tightly. Rosa and 2 volunteers occupied the seats across from them. Everyone was quiet, each lost in their thoughts. Miss Marple, however, watched everything with calm clarity. The trees blurred past the windows, the tracks hummed beneath them, and somewhere in the distance ahead, thousands were gathering for a moment that would reshape history. Mary whispered, "Do you think he'll be there?" Miss Marple didn't have to ask who he was. Terence Hale, a smiling man who disguised betrayal behind polite gestures. A man who had silenced Evelyn. A man who now believed he could silence the truth forever. Yes, Miss Marple said softly. He will be there, because he knows we are close. Mary shivered. But what if he tries to hurt us? Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on hers. Remember what Evelyn wrote, truth multiplies. He can frighten us, but he cannot stop the truth. Rosa leaned forward. We show her evidence today. If we get the document Evelyn hid, we can get him exposed. Miss Marple nodded. Evelyn's final note had said the last clue waited in Washington. Somewhere hidden among the hopes of thousands. Somewhere Hal would not expect an elderly English woman to uncover. The train whistle blew as they approached the Capitol. Miss Marple looked out the window. Crowds were already gathering, families, students, ministers, workers, dreamers, walking toward the Lincoln Memorial with banners held high. The day was bright, the air alive, history preparing itself. And Miss Marple was ready. When Miss Marple stepped into the massive crowd, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Voices blended into a beautiful, powerful hum-hope in its purest form. Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Miss Marple, this is incredible." "Yes, dear," Miss Marple whispered. "History sings loudly here. People held signs. "Freedom now. We shall not be moved. Give us the vote." And children sat on their fathers' shoulders, waving small flags with innocent courage. But Miss Marple wasn't here for the speeches. She was here for Evelyn's message. Rosa pointed toward a small gathering near the reflecting pool. "That's where volunteers from different states place their banners. Evelyn told us she left something near the Georgia Freedom Board." Miss Marple nodded and moved through the crowd, her cane steady, her steps deliberate. Her mind remained sharply focused. Then she felt it, a presence, a cold awareness pressing against her back. She didn't turn, but she knew. Terence Hale was here. Mary whispered, "I see him. Behind us, near the statue." Miss Marple's jaw tightened. "He's waiting, watching. He knows Evelyn's clues lead here." They continued walking until they reached the Georgia section. A large board displayed photos of volunteers, lists of marchers, and handmade messages. The board was surrounded by young people handing out flyers. Miss Marple approached the corner Evelyn had circled in her sketch. Nothing obvious. Then she noticed a folded paper tucked behind a photograph of a young marcher holding a torch. Her heart quickened. She reached forward. "Careful," Rosa whispered. Miss Marple gently pulled out the paper. Evelyn's handwriting. "If you found this, the truth is near. The document is not on paper. It is printed ink. Printed ink." Miss Marple inhaled sharply. Evelyn hadn't hidden a written confession. She had hidden a printed flyer. One of the flyers Hale had altered. One that proved sabotage. One that could expose his betrayal to thousands. But which one? A loud cheer erupted suddenly from the crowd as Dr. King approached the steps, preparing for his speech. Thousands pressed forward. Mary grabbed Miss Marple's arm. "We have to move, we're getting pushed in." Miss Marple steadied herself, and then she saw him. Terence Hale, standing barely 20 feet away, eyes locked on her. A smile that didn't belong anywhere near this day. He began moving toward her. Mary trembled. "Miss Marple." "No, dear," Miss Marple whispered. "I don't run from the truth." She clutched Evelyn's note tightly. The printed flyer was here somewhere among the thousands of sheets being handed out, and she had to find it before Hale did. Flyers flew through the air, slogans, schedules, quotes, maps. Volunteers passed them out by the hundreds. Miss Marple scanned them with quick but deliberate eyes. Mary found one. "Is this it?" "No," Miss Marple said, examining the edges. "The ink pattern is unaltered. This wasn't touched." Rosa hurried back with 3 more. "All original," Miss Marple murmured. Then she remembered Evelyn's words. "The document is printed ink. Follow the symbols." Evelyn always left marks. Miss Marple turned one flyer over clean, another nothing, a third. She froze. At the bottom corner, barely visible in the blue print ink, a tiny shape was pressed into the paper. 3 arrows, a circle, Evelyn's signature. Miss Marple felt her breath tremble. "This is it." Mary's eyes widened. "What does it say?" Miss Marple opened the flyer. At first glance, it seemed identical to others, but the meeting location printed on it, the one for the Birmingham protest months ago, was different from the real location Evelyn had described. This flyer matched the altered routes Evelyn had exposed at the printing press. It proved sabotage. It proved betrayal. It proved Hale had misled marchers directly into danger. Miss Marple folded the flyer carefully and placed it inside her coat pocket. "We need to get this to Dr. King's team," Rosa whispered urgently. Miss Marple nodded, but before they could move, a hand clamped onto Mary's shoulder. She gasped. Terence Hale stood behind her, calm, confident, dangerous. "I believe you have something of mine," he said softly. Miss Marple stepped between Hale and Mary. Her voice remained soft, yet unwavering. "Mr. Hale, you have betrayed these people. You endangered children. You silenced Evelyn." Hale's smile faltered for the first time. "You don't understand anything, old woman." "I understand enough." Her grip tightened on her cane. "These people want justice. You want control. Evelyn saw your fear, and you punished her for it." Hale's jaw clenched. She should have stayed quiet. Miss Marple shook her head gently. "You should have stayed honest." The roar of the crowd swelled behind them as Dr. King began speaking. Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice. Hand over the flyer. Miss Marple met his gaze calmly. "No," his expression darkened. "You think anyone will believe a foreigner? An old lady meddling in American politics?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I don't need them to believe me. I only need them to see your flyer." Hale's confidence cracked. He lunged, but Mary and Rosa stepped in front of Miss Marple instantly, forming a shield. Volunteers nearby noticed the commotion. "What's going on?" one man shouted. "He's threatening her," Mary cried. Eyes turned. Hale froze because crowds are dangerous to men who hide. He stepped back, his composure slipping. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. Miss Marple shook her head. "No, Mr. Hale, the mistake was yours." As the crowd shifted around them, Dr. King's voice rose over them all. "I have a dream." The words rolled through the air, powerful enough to settle storms. Hale glared at Miss Marple, but he could not move, not while thousands watched, not while hope stood on marble steps. Miss Marple turned to Rosa. "Get the flyer to Dr. King's team, quietly, quickly." Rosa nodded and slipped through the crowd. Mary held Miss Marple's hand tightly. "Are you all right?" Miss Marple exhaled slowly. "Yes, dear, but we're not finished." As Dr. King's dream filled the world, Hale stood trapped, unable to act, unable to silence the truth. Miss Marple watched him carefully. Up ahead, Rosa reached to aides near the steps and passed the flyer into their hands. They looked at it, frowned, and immediately carried it away. It was done. Evelyn's truth had reached the right people. Miss Marple felt a wave of emotion swell within her chest. The girl who had carved symbols into wood and paper. The girl who had feared the Watchers. The girl who had hidden evidence where only courage could find it. Her voice was finally heard. Miss Marple whispered softly, "Rest now, dear Evelyn. Your truth is safe." The crowd erupted into applause as Dr. King finished his speech. Hale turned away, vanishing into the sea of people, cornered by justice he could no longer manipulate. Miss Marple stood quietly beneath the warm sun, the Lincoln Memorial towering above her. The march had ended, but one final chapter remained, Evelyn's fate and the reflection Miss Marple owed her. Chapter 10. Miss Marple's final reflection. The silence that speak. The march on Washington ended, slowly, like a great wave retreating back into the ocean. Families drifted away toward buses and trains. Volunteers gathered scattered signs. Voices softened into murmurs, then into reflections. Miss Marple remained standing near the reflecting pool long after the crowds had thinned. The water shimmered with the fading evening sun, mirroring the sky in soft strokes of gold and pink. Mary approached quietly. "Are you all right?" Miss Marple nodded. Her eyes remained fixed on the rippling water. "I am simply absorbing the day," she whispered. "A day that will be remembered long after the four of us are gone." Mary sat beside her on the stone ledge. Dr. King's speech was, She couldn't find the word. Nothing seemed large enough. Miss Marple completed her thought gently. Alive. Mary nodded. That's exactly it. They sat in silence for a moment, feeling the weight of history settling around them. Then Mary's expression darkened. Do you think he'll come after us again, Terence Hale? Miss Marple shook her head. No, he cannot act now. Too many eyes saw him today, and the flyer is no longer in our hands. It is in the hands of people who will not be silenced. Mary exhaled with relief. But what about Evelyn? There's still no sign of her. No one even knows. Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We will find her story, and we will honor her truth. For the first time since they began their journey, Mary believed that completely. The next morning, Miss Marple returned to Atlanta with Mary and Rosa. The city felt different now, still tense, still scarred, but newly hopeful, as if the echoes of thousands of voices had reached even its quietest corners. They walked together to the small house where the movement's planning took place. Volunteers were already meeting, discussing future marches, future strategies, future risks. Rosa greeted them warmly, though her eyes were tired. Did Dr. King's team confirm anything from the flyer? Mary asked. Rosa nodded. They said it was enough to open an investigation. Hale may deny everything, but now there's scrutiny. He can't hide behind his charm anymore. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction settle within her chest. Then Rosa's expression dimmed. There's something else, she said softly. One of the volunteers found something by the river this morning. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her cane. Show me. They walked through the neighborhood until they reached a small wooden bridge overlooking a gentle stream. Rosa pointed to a patch of reeds. It was caught in the branches. Miss Marple knelt and carefully lifted the object. A scarf, light blue, embroidered with tiny white flowers. Mary gasped. That's Evelyn's. She wore it in Birmingham. Miss Marple's heart pressed painfully against her ribs. The scarf was torn on one side, waterlogged, as if dropped or pulled from someone's hand. But Miss Marple saw something else, a final message Evelyn had managed to leave behind. Near one embroidered flower, the stitching was disturbed, irregular, different thread. Mary recognized it first. The symbol, she whispered. Yes. Barely visible, but unmistakable. 3 arrows, a circle, and below it, a small open hand. Miss Marple touched it gently. A hand, she murmured, open, not closed, not clenched. Rosa whispered, what does it mean? Miss Marple felt tears prick her eyes. Peace, she said softly. Surrender or acceptance. Mary's voice trembled. Do you think she's gone? Miss Marple closed her eyes. I think Evelyn understood the danger she was in, and she accepted her fate not out of fear, but out of courage. She looked at the scarf again, heart aching. She knew her work would continue even if she didn't survive. Silence settled over them like a tender blanket. Not heavy, not crushing, soft, honoring. They returned to the planning house, bringing Evelyn's scarf with them. When the volunteers saw it, the room fell silent. An elderly woman began to weep softly. A young man clenched his fists, tears glowing in his eyes. Another whispered a prayer. Rosa placed the scarf on the center table. We should keep it here, she said, in the room where she worked, where her courage lived. Miss Marple nodded. She spoke gently, but her words carried the weight of everything Evelyn had sacrificed. This movement survives because people like Evelyn choose truth over safety, over comfort, over their own lives. Mary wiped her tears. She was just a teenager, Yes, Miss Marple said softly, and that makes her even braver. The volunteers gathered around the table, forming a quiet circle. One by one, they placed small objects beside the scarf: a pencil, a hymn book, a folded flyer, a march ribbon, tokens of the movement she had fought to protect. Miss Marple stepped back, her heart swelling with a mixture of grief and pride. Evelyn's voice was gone, but her impact, her symbols, her diary, her courage, had ignited a fire in dozens of young hearts. And that fire would not go out. Before returning to England, Miss Marple made one final stop: Montgomery, the beginning of everything. The segregated bus stop where Evelyn had carved her first symbol. The place where Miss Marple had first felt the weight of this journey. She stood beside the old bench, touching the carving gently. 3 arrows. A circle, a meeting point. A beginning. Mary stepped beside her. "What are you thinking?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. That the world changes because ordinary people refuse to stay silent, and because young girls like Evelyn choose to fight even when the world tells them they cannot. She looked around the empty station. Courage isn't loud, Mary. It isn't always in speeches or marches. Sometimes it is carved quietly into wood, left in diaries, hidden under ink, and whispered in hymns. Mary nodded slowly. She saved lives. Yes, Miss Marple whispered, and she changed mine. They began walking toward the train station. The sky above them glowed with early evening light. Miss Marple felt a gentle calm settle inside her, not because everything was solved, but because everything had been seen. The truth was no longer buried. Back in Atlanta that night, Miss Marple sat alone near the window of her small room. The city lights flickered gently, glowing like distant candles. She opened Evelyn's diary one last time. The trembling handwriting, the hurried thoughts, the symbols, all of it told a story not of fear, but of extraordinary bravery. Miss Marple whispered softly, "You were not silenced, my dear. Your truth traveled through us, and now it will live on in the hearts of thousands." She closed the diary with reverence. In that moment, she felt Evelyn's presence, not ghostly, but warm, a quiet strength. A girl who had believed her small voice mattered. A girl who had believed truth deserved protectors. A girl whose courage had shaped every step of Miss Marple's journey. Mary knocked gently on the door. "Miss Marple, the volunteers want to thank you." Miss Marple rose slowly, leaning on her cane. "I did very little," she said softly. "Evelyn did everything." Mary smiled. "You helped us hear her." Miss Marple followed her out, gazing once more at the city lights. And as she walked into the room filled with young volunteers, she felt something deep and unshakable. Hope is louder than fear. Truth is stronger than silence. And every brave voice, no matter how small, changes the world.